A battered military handler and two loyal German shepherds dragged across a frozen highway in the dead of night, left to die by a man who believed no one would ever find them, their bodies torn by ice, their hope fading with every mile. They were never meant to rise again. But fate placed a grieving trucker on that same road, a man who knew too well what it felt like to lose everything and what it meant to fight even when the world moved on. He didn't look away, he didn't drive past. In that blizzard, 3 lives hung by a thread, and one stranger's courage changed their destiny forever. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. The winter storm swallowed the Wyoming highlands in a white, howling void. Hank Mercer drove straight into it, his hands clamped to the wheel of his Kenworth T680 as if the machine's vibrations were the only thing still tethering him to the world. At 55, Hank was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a square, time-cut face and a salt and pepper beard that had grown uneven after months of not caring. His gray eyes had once been warm. His wife, Laura, used to call them the color of morning steel. But since losing her to cancer 8 months earlier, they had dulled into something muted and hollow. The storm suited him. Inside it, no one could see his grief, and he didn't have to pretend he had healed. The snow hit the windshield in thick sheets, each blast of wind shaking the cab like a reprimand. The headlights carved only a short tunnel through the whiteout, and the rest of the world vanished behind it. Hank preferred the silence, the isolation, the steady hum of the diesel beneath him. Noise kept the memories at bay, memories of Laura's thin hands, her fading voice, the cruelty of watching someone strong dissolve into frailty. He drove because stopping meant remembering, and remembering still hurt too much to survive. He was thinking of nothing at all, letting the storm's rhythm numb him when the first wrong thing appeared, a smear of movement far ahead, twitching like a shadow dragged by the wind. Hank leaned forward, aware of the small creak the seat may have made under his weight. The shape grew clearer only in fragments, a vehicle, dark, low, plowing across the ice-slicked highway at a reckless speed. Its taillights flickered scarlet through the blizzard, frantic as a heartbeat. But it was what trailed behind the SUV that made Hank's stomach pull tight. At first, it looked like debris whipping across the road, caught by a rope or chain. Something long, something heavy, something alive. Hank narrowed his eyes, forcing them to focus through the swirling ice. When the headlights finally caught it, the truth struck like a hammer to the ribs. It wasn't cargo or trash. It was a woman, a human body, and 2 dogs bound to her. Lieutenant Mara Hensley was young, maybe 32, with dark brown hair matted to her cheeks, her uniform shredded by ice and steel. She had the lean, powerful build of someone trained to move decisively, the kind of posture that once commanded respect. Even dragged across the ice, her face, angular, wind-burned, and dusted with blood, held the stubborn tension of a fighter refusing to let go. The cable cinched around her waist yanked her violently every time the SUV hit a patch of rough ice. Her breath puffed weakly in the cold, fading fast. Beside her, 2 German shepherds were bound to the same line. The larger one, Atlas, older by the gray threading his sable coat, threw his bruised body over Mara's shoulder again and again, shielding her head from the worst of the ice shards. His ears were torn, his paws raw, but his eyes, fierce amber, never left her. The younger dog, Rook, maybe 3 years old with a sharper, narrower muzzle, struggled wildly, letting out broken cries as he tried to gain footing on the frozen road. Every few seconds he collapsed, only to force himself upright again, driven by pure instinct to stay beside his handler. Hank felt something crack open inside him, something he thought the world had frozen over long ago. Rage. And something like fear, not for himself, but for the woman who had no strength left to fight the ice clawing at her skin. He slammed his boot on the brake so hard the cab shuddered, the trailer fishtailing as the rig skidded across the iced highway. The horns of the storm swallowed the scream of rubber on ice. Hank yanked the wheel sharply, swinging the massive truck sideways across both lanes. In the storm's blinding fury, the Kenworth became a steel barricade, an immovable wall between the SUV and whatever final cruelty its driver intended. Snow exploded around him in a violent halo as the rig ground to a stop, blocking the highway. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then headlights flared behind the swirl of white. The SUV jerked savagely, its driver slamming the brakes too late, tires skidding across the polished ice. It fish-tailed wildly before coming to a halt just 20 feet from Hank's trailer. The cable snapped taut, dragging Mara and the dogs one last brutal stretch before slackening. Hank's heart hammered against his ribs, the storm roaring around him like the breath of something ancient. In that moment, he wasn't a grieving widower running from an empty house. He was the only barrier between life and death for three helpless beings. And someone out there had intended for them to die alone in the snow. Without hesitating, Hank reached for the heavy-duty flashlight in his cab and shoved his door open, stepping into the blizzard. The wind hit him like a wall of knives, but he didn't slow. The SUV's engine revved once, a warning growl behind the white curtain. Hank didn't care. He moved forward with the grim, unstoppable force of a storm-carved mountain, heading straight toward the bound woman and her loyal, broken dogs, knowing without doubt that whatever happened next, he would not stand aside and let cruelty finish what it had started. The blizzard held its breath as Hank stepped toward the fallen trio, Mara Hensley barely conscious, Atlas and Rook trembling violently, their fur stiff with frost and blood. For a moment the storm's roar dimmed, as if waiting to see what kind of man Hank Mercer truly was. He knelt beside the injured German shepherds, his thick-gloved hand brushing over Atlas first. The older dog's fur, dark sable streaked with gray, rose weakly under Hank's touch. Atlas's amber eyes flickered with guarded instinct. He was a senior K-9, trained, disciplined, proud, but his strength was nearly gone. Rook, the younger shepherd, 3 years old with sharper features and a narrower face, lay panting in shallow bursts, eyes wide with pain and fear, but still glued to Mara's limp form. Hank knew instantly that these dogs weren't just service animals. They were her lifeline, and someone had tried to sever it. A crunch of boots behind him sliced through the wind. Hank rose slowly, turning toward the SUV now idling 20 paces away, its headlights throwing long, hostile shapes. The driver's door slammed. A man emerged into the swirling white, a silhouette carved in arrogance and malice. Brennan Cole. He stepped forward with a predator's casual confidence. Brennan was in his late 30s, tall but lean, with the wiry build of someone hardened more by violence than discipline. A sharp jawline dusted with stubble framed his pale, angular face. His eyes were an unsettling slate blue, cold, quick, always calculating. His blonde hair, shaved close at the sides and longer on top, whipped in the wind like a banner of defiance. He wore a dark tactical jacket too thin for the weather, suggesting he didn't fear the cold or the consequences. Brennan flashed a smirk, the kind belonging to men who had never been punched for talking too much. "I'll be damned," he shouted over the storm. "Didn't expect company out here. Highway's supposed to be empty tonight." Hank said nothing. He stepped slightly in front of Mara's body, as though his bulk alone could shield her. Brennan's boots, expensive, insulated combat grade, crunched closer. "You picked a hell of a night to play hero, old man." His eyes trailed down to Mara, then to the dogs. "She's a stubborn one. Would have been easier if she just handed over what I needed, but Marines always think they're invincible." Mara stirred faintly, her breath shallow. Hank's jaw tightened. Brennan saw it and laughed, sharp, mocking. "Relax, she's not special. Just a failed product in the wrong place at the wrong time." His voice dropped to a tone dripping with contempt. "I was teaching her a lesson about loyalty." Hank's voice rumbled low, almost lost in the storm. "Looks to me like you don't know a thing about loyalty." Brennan twitched an eyebrow, amused. Spare me the hero talk. Step aside, I'll clean up what's left, and we can all pretend none of this happened. He tapped the pistol holstered at his hip, a sleek black sidearm with a custom grip. Hank didn't flinch. He bent down, grabbed the severed cable, and hurled it into the snow. Not happening. A long, dangerous silence stretched between them. The blizzard wailed around them, snow whipping sideways, stinging exposed skin. Brennan's smirk thinned. Old man, you don't know who you're dealing with. Hank took one heavy step forward. I know enough. Brennan's hand inched toward his pistol. Last warning. Move. Hank didn't. The decision landed between them like a hammer. Brennan cursed, drawing the gun, but in the same heartbeat, Hank lunged for the truck's passenger door, slamming it with the force of a battering ram. The heavy steel door boomed through the night, the metallic echo rolling across the frozen highway. Brennan flinched, just 1 second, but enough. In that second, Hank scooped up the younger dog first. Rook whimpered in agony as Hank lifted him, but the shepherd didn't snap. He recognized the intention, the urgency. Hank placed him gently onto the cab's floor. Then he turned back for Atlas. The older dog was heavier, far more injured, and his fur was slick with partially frozen blood. Hank carefully slid his arms under the thick torso, grunting as he lifted the shepherd against his chest. Atlas let out a low growl, not at Hank, but at the cold and the pain. Hank met the dog's gaze. I know, boy, I know. Hang on. Once Atlas was secure inside, he returned for Mara. She lay motionless except for the weak fog of her breath. Her skin was pale, lips tinged blue, and strands of frozen dark hair clung to her cheeks like fragile vines. Hank slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and another under her knees. She felt impossibly light for someone trained in combat. Too light. Stay with me, Lieutenant, he muttered. She didn't respond. Brennan's voice cut through the storm. Put her down, Mercer. So he knew Hank's name. That sent a chill sharper than the wind. Hank didn't waste a second. He lifted Mara into the cab, tucking her between the dogs, both shepherds pressing close as if trying to share their warmth with her. Brennan raised his pistol. You think you can drive away from me in a blizzard? Hank climbed into the driver's seat, his broad frame filling the cab. Watch me. He slammed the door shut. Brennan fired, the gunshot muffled by the storm but still sharp. The bullet struck the door handle, sending a burst of sparks into the night. Hank didn't hesitate. He jammed his foot onto the accelerator. The Kenworth's tires spun, then bit into the ice. The engine roared, a metallic beast awakening. Hank jerked the wheel. The massive truck lurched forward and sideways simultaneously, sending a wave of slush and snow into Brennan's face. The SUV's lights spun wildly in the mirror. Brennan stumbled back, blinded for a moment. That moment was all Hank needed. He drove straight into the heart of the storm, away from Brennan, away from the threat, toward anything resembling safety. Inside the cab, Mara slumped against the seat, barely conscious. Her breathing quickened in ragged gasps. Atlas nudged her chin with his muzzle, a soft, desperate gesture. Rook pressed his body against her side, trembling violently. Hank risked a glance at them. I've got you, he said quietly. The blizzard swallowed the truck behind a curtain of white, erasing it from sight as if the night itself conspired to hide their escape. But even as the highway vanished behind him, Hank knew Brennan wouldn't give up. Men like him, men shaped by greed and arrogance, didn't let their prey go easily. And this storm, unforgiving and brutally silent, was only the beginning of the fight to come. The blizzard thinned into a wavering veil as Hank fought the wheel through the narrowing pass that led into Jackson Valley. The storm was still vicious, snow blowing sideways, wind clawing at the truck, but visibility had improved enough for him to trust the road again. Inside the cab, lit only by the faint glow of the dashboard, Mara Hensley drifted in and out of consciousness, her breath ragged and shallow. Her face, angular and scraped by ice, twitched with flashbacks only she could see. Atlas lay beside her, the older German shepherd's gray-streaked coat rising unsteadily with every breath. Rook curled on her opposite side, trembling but alert, ears flicking each time she gasped. Hank kept glancing at them, at all three of them, and every time a spike of protective instinct shot through him. He didn't know Mara, didn't know her story, but the battered dogs pressing against her ribs said she was worth saving. And Hank Mercer had learned, after losing Laura, that sometimes instinct was all a man had left. Finally, the lights of the valley flickered through the storm. Small, golden, warm, scattered like fallen stars across the snow-covered basin. Hank turned onto a barely visible gravel track, tires crunching over the ice. At the base of a ridge sat a squat concrete and wood structure, its metal roof coated in a thick layer of snow. A faded sign swung in the wind. Sage's Fix and Fuel. The letters were worn, half buried in frost. Hank laid on the horn twice, a low, familiar signal. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then a side door creaked open, spilling amber light onto the snow. A figure stepped into view, broad-shouldered, heavy-set, wrapped in an old green parka with fur around the hood. Sage Mallory. Hank hadn't seen him in nearly 7 years, but Sage's shape was unmistakable. A huge man, well over 6 feet, built like a wall of stacked stone. His face, once clean-cut from his days as a military medic, was now covered with a thick, copper-brown beard peppered with silver. Deep creases ran from the corners of his eyes, lines carved by fatigue, worry, and years of tending to broken things in silence. His skin had the roughened, weathered tone of someone who lived closer to machines than people. But his eyes, dark hazel, sharp and intelligent, hadn't changed. They flicked to the truck with recognition, then concern. He cupped his hands around his mouth. "Hank, you picked the worst nights to come back from the dead." Hank opened the door and shouted through the wind, "Got 3 down, need heat and hands." A switch flipped instantly behind Sage's eyes. The giant medic sprinted across the snow with surprising speed for someone his size. He pulled open the passenger side door just as Hank climbed down. The warm air from inside the garage wafted out in a welcome wave. Sage leaned in, his huge frame nearly filling the doorway. When he saw Mara and the 2 German shepherds, something darkened in his expression, recognition of battlefield wounds, the kind only cruelty could cause. "Get them inside," he ordered, voice firm, steady. "Now!" Between the 2 men, they lifted Mara first. She was light, too light, her uniform torn and stiff with frozen blood. Sage carried her in his arms with practiced ease, as though she weighed nothing. Inside the garage, yellow bulbs hummed overhead, illuminating a cluttered space filled with old tools, spare parts, and a wood stove glowing fiercely. The heat hit hard, almost painful after the cold. Hank and Sage laid Mara on a canvas cot near the heater. Atlas and Rook, both limping, dragged themselves inside. The smell of blood and wet fur filled the room, but neither dog made a sound. Their loyalty anchored them, even in agony. Sage knelt beside Mara, pushing back her hair, dark brown, frozen into sharp strands, and pressed 2 fingers gently against her neck. "She's alive," he muttered. "Barely." Mara's eyelids fluttered. She jerked suddenly, a small, frantic inhalation, her eyes unfocused and wild. Her breath came too fast, shallow gasps of someone trapped between memory and present. PTSD surged through her in violent waves. Sage held her shoulders, his voice calm but commanding. "Lieutenant, you're safe. You hear me? You're safe right now." But she couldn't hear the words. Not yet. She trembled, her hands clawing at the air, until Atlas limped forward and pushed his muzzle against her palm. Rook followed, nuzzling her arm. The change was immediate. Mara's breath stuttered, slowed. Her eyes blinked several times before focusing faintly on the 2 shepherds. Her fingers curled into Atlas's fur. Her voice broke into a whisper so soft it barely formed sound. "Atlas, Rook, good boys." Her trembling eased. Sage watched the dogs knowingly. They're grounding her. Seen it 100 times with combat handlers. Hank stood nearby, arms crossed over his thick chest, watching the scene. What happened to her, Sage? Sage didn't look up from bandaging the gashes on Mara's arms. What always happens when a good soldier crosses the wrong kind of people? Hank clenched his jaw. Brennan Cole. The name was enough. Sage's head snapped up, eyes burning with recognition. That bastard still breathing? He's the one who did this. Sage let out a long, low exhale, something between anger and resignation. Hank, Brennan's not just another thug. He's tied in with private security contractors, the real dirty kind. He's got money, clients, connections, and a god complex. He'll come back for her, and if he knows you helped, he'll come for you too. Hank didn't flinch. Let him come. Sage frowned. This isn't the same world you ran from when Laura... Don't, Hank growled quietly. Sage nodded, backing off. He finished wrapping Rook's paws, smaller but deeply abraded, and then moved to Atlas, whose larger frame hid far worse wounds beneath his thick coat. The older shepherd whimpered softly but kept still. Sage worked quickly, hands steady, movements precise. Despite the years of isolation, the medic in him had never dulled. When the wind outside finally dropped to a whisper, Sage stood abruptly and moved to the window. He froze. Then his voice dropped into a growl. Hank. Hank joined him. In the distance beyond the swirling remnants of the storm, 3 sets of headlights crawled over the ridge, slow, deliberate, coordinated. Armored pickup trucks, dark paint, reinforced grills. Sage's voice was low, grim. He found us. Hank stared through the glass, muscles tightening beneath his jacket. Brennan. Sage stepped back from the window, his face shifting into the hardened expression Hank remembered from the field hospital days. The look of a man preparing for the worst. We don't have long. They'll box us in. Mara, still semi-conscious, turned her head weakly toward the lights. Something like instinct flickered in her battered green eyes. They came, she whispered. Atlas pressed closer to her chest, growling faintly. Rook mirrored him. Hank placed a heavy hand on Sage's shoulder. We hold them off long enough to move her. Sage grabbed a wrench the size of a small crowbar, weighing it like a familiar weapon. Hope you're ready, old friend, he muttered, because Brennan Cole didn't come here to talk. As the trucks descended into the valley, their engines echoing through the frozen air, Hank felt the shift inside him, the old version of himself, the one he thought had died with Laura, rising from the ashes. Tonight he wasn't just a trucker, he was a shield, and Brennan had just stepped into the wrong valley. The chapter ends as the headlights flood the snow outside Sage's garage, the first armored truck screeching to a halt. Brennan Cole stepping out into the cold with a smile that promised violence. The storm had eased into a low, cold whisper, but the tension inside Sage's snow-covered repair station was sharp enough to cut through steel. The lights were dimmed, the heater crackled in a corner, and every person and animal inside was braced for the inevitable. Mara lay on the cot, half upright now, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. Her dark hair, still damp from melted snow, clung to her temples, and her normally sharp green eyes were clouded with lingering pain and exhaustion. Atlas sat pressed against her side, the older German shepherd bracing himself despite his bandaged paw pads. Rook lay curled near her feet, younger, smaller, trembling but alert, his amber eyes tracking every sound outside. Hank Mercer stood near the main garage door, his tall, broad-shouldered silhouette lit only by a sliver of moonlight from a small, high window. His graying stubble, deep-set eyes, and lined face made him look like a man forged from wind, loss, and distance. He held a heavy wrench in one hand, his version of a shield, while the other stayed pressed against the door to feel the vibrations outside. Brennan's men were close. He knew the rhythm of danger, and the rhythm was tightening. Sage Mallory, towering and bearded, kept pacing between the radio unit and the window, his massive hands restless despite years of learning how to stay calm through battlefield chaos. Sage's parka hung open now, revealing a worn navy blue sweater stretched over a large chest. His beard twitched whenever he clenched his jaw, which tonight was often. He kept glancing at Mara, at the dogs, at Hank. He looked like a man counting ways to defend people he cared about, with no good options left. Then the loudspeakers outside crackled, and Brennan Cole's voice shattered the quiet. "Bring her out. The dogs too. I'm done waiting." Brennan's tone was smooth, theatrical, but beneath it was ice. He stood outside, surrounded by 3 armed men, their silhouettes visible in the glow of truck headlights slicing through the snow. Brennan himself was wearing a dark winter coat trimmed with fur, his blonde hair slicked back, his sharp, angular jaw clean-shaven and shining under the lights. His eyes, cold blue, predatory, reflected no hesitation. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who built a career on breaking people until they had nothing left to give. Hank's voice slid low. "He's impatient. That's good for us." Sage didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed a burner phone from behind a toolbox and tapped a number quickly. "Aria," he muttered. "Pick up, kid." A few seconds later, a voice answered, sharp, composed, and edged with confidence. "Dad, you don't call unless something's on fire." Sage exhaled shakily. "We've got trouble, the bad kind." Aria Mallory, Sage's daughter, was a military attorney in Denver. Brilliant, relentless, and the only person Sage trusted with anything involving the law or danger. She was in her early 30s, athletic and tall, with dark chestnut hair usually tied in a tight bun. She had their family's hazel eyes, but hers were sharper, honed by years of interrogations and courtroom battles. Her voice carried the same steel Sage once used on battlefields, but refined into legal precision. Sage summarized quickly. "Brennan Cole, he found us here. He wants Mara and the dogs. He's armed, and he's not alone." Aria's tone shifted instantly into full tactical mode. "Put your phone near his frequency receiver. I'll handle the rest." Outside, Brennan's men approached the metal doors with crowbars. The scraping was violent, jarring, echoing through the entire building. Mara tensed, instinctively clutching Atlas's fur. The older shepherd pressed into her, grounding her again. Rook growled, but it was a small, wounded sound. Then Sage switched on the broadcast, and Aria's voice thundered straight into Brennan's internal comms. "Brennan Cole, this is Aria Mallory, Judge Advocate Corps. Your vehicles, your weapons, and your attempts to breach private property are being observed and logged. Touch that door and you'll be charged with federal assault on a recovering officer under medical care." The scraping outside stopped. Aria continued, sharper. "You are armed, trespassing, and threatening a U.S. Army lieutenant recovering from attempted homicide. You will stand down immediately, or I will have federal marshals waiting for you when you reach your next gas station." Inside the garage, Hank raised an eyebrow. "Well, she's something." Sage gave a small, humorless smile. "She gets that from her mother." Outside, Brennan shouted something muffled to his men. The trucks idled. One of them backed away slightly. They weren't retreating, but they were reassessing. Brennan understood one thing very well: consequences. But Sage shook his head. "He's not leaving. He's just waiting for us to make a move." Aria's voice returned on the phone. "Listen carefully. You won't hold out forever. You need to move her." Hank stepped closer. "To where?" There was a rustle of papers on Aria's end, her tone firm. "There's a facility in northern Montana, North Wind Refuge. It's run by a former Air Force psychologist named Dr. Leora Hale. She specializes in extreme PTSD and K-9 rehabilitation. The place is damn near invisible from the outside. Only one mountain road leads in. No one follows without being spotted." Mara lifted her head weakly at the name. "North Wind. I've heard of her," she whispered. "She treated handlers after Kabul fell." Aria continued. "Get her to Hale. If Brennan wants her this badly, it means she knows something he doesn't want getting out. She'll need both time and protection. Hank didn't hesitate. I'll take her. My truck's built for winter roads, and Brennan may be dangerous, but he sure as hell can't maneuver like a sleeper cab. Sage stared at him. Hank, you don't owe us this. You don't owe anyone anything. Hank looked at Mara, bleeding, shaking, holding on to two loyal dogs who would die for her. His voice softened. I know. Maybe that's why I'm doing it. He turned to the cot. That woman deserves help. Those dogs deserve safety, and Brennan deserves to lose. Mara swallowed hard. If you take me, he'll hunt you. Hank offered her a faint, tired smile. He's welcome to try. Preparation became a blur of motion. Sage fetched a thick canvas duffel from a hidden shelf, stuffed with emergency cash, medical supplies, spare batteries, and a small revolver wrapped in cloth. Take it, he said gruffly, and keep your lights off until you're past Teton Ridge. He bandaged Atlas and Rook again, layering extra insulation on their paws. The dogs endured it silently, though Atlas's breathing hitched with every touch. Mara tried to stand, but her knees buckled. Hank caught her, lifting her with ease. She was embarrassed, her strong-willed pride peeking through the exhaustion, but she didn't fight him. In the distance, Brennan's headlights shifted. Engines revved, restless, circling. Sage gripped Hank's forearm with both hands. Bring them home, Hank. Hank nodded once. I'll get them to Montana, no matter what's on the road. With Sage covering the rear door, Hank guided Mara and the dogs toward the truck's cab. Snow whipped around them, stinging their faces. Atlas leaned heavily against Hank's leg. Rook limped close behind Mara. Just as Hank lifted Mara into the passenger seat, one of Brennan's trucks surged forward. Headlights exploded across the valley. Hank threw open the driver's door. Go, go, Sage whispered harshly. Hank climbed in, slammed it shut, and turned the ignition. The engine roared alive, the thunderous heartbeat of escape. As Brennan's men shouted orders behind them, Hank Mercer jammed the truck into gear. The wheels skidded, caught, and then the massive Kenworth lunged forward into the white emptiness of the night. Behind them, Sage Mallory stood in the swirling snow, watching the taillights disappear. And above the roar of engines, Brennan Cole's furious scream echoed across the frozen valley. The dawn over northern Montana rose like a soft exhale, pale blue light bleeding slowly into a world carved from ice and silence. Hank Mercer had been driving for hours without stopping, each mile devoured by the steady hum of his Kenworth, each turn chosen with the precision of a man who'd spent half his life talking to roads as though they were living things. The forest around them was buried in fresh snow, thick, untouched, and shimmering faintly under the new sun. Wind still swept across the tree line, rattling branches and sending flurries swirling against the truck's windows, but it no longer carried the rage of the night storm. Inside the cab, Mara Hensley leaned back against her seat, breathing slow and steady. She looked stronger than she had the night before, her color less gray, her eyes more aware. Her dark hair, usually tied tight beneath her uniform cap, now spilled over her shoulders in tangled strands, bits of frost still woven in the ends. She watched the trees pass with a guarded intensity, her hand resting on Atlas's back. Atlas lay stretched across the narrow space between the seats, his bandaged paws tucked under him. Rook, smaller and lighter, was curled in Mara's lap, his warm breath fogging the glass whenever he lifted his head. Mara spoke quietly, her voice hoarse but steady. They're calmer now. The shakes are less frequent. Hank glanced over, his deep-set eyes warming with something like relief. They feel you breathing easier. Dogs feel everything. Mara let out a breath that ghosted the window. I never thought we'd make it this far. Hank didn't respond. He didn't need to. Every line in his weathered face already told the truth. There was no universe where he'd have let them fall into Brennan's hands again. 3 times during the night he'd been forced to kill the lights entirely. guiding the truck into deep snow ruts or between frozen ridges as Brennan's search vehicles prowled the roads. The men Brennan sent were relentless, high beams sweeping through the forest, engines snarling like wolves searching for the wounded. But Hank's instincts, sharpened by decades of long-haul solitude and the quiet rage of a man who'd once lost everything, guided them through every close call. When Mara drifted asleep for short spells, Hank kept glancing at her reflection in the windshield, at the faint strength returning to her jaw, at the way her fingers curled protectively around the dogs, and each time, something in him settled. He wasn't running from ghosts anymore. He was running toward something. Near sunrise, the snow began to fall in thin, delicate flakes, nothing like the violent storm that had chased them out of Jackson Valley. These flakes drifted slowly, peacefully, as if testing whether the sky was finally safe. Then, through the trees, a wooden sign came into view, weathered but steady, carved deep with clean letters. Northwind Refuge, private road, authorized. Entry only. Mara sat up straighter, breath catching. "We made it!" Hank turned the truck onto the narrow mountain path, tires crunching over ice and frozen gravel. The road twisted upward, cutting between pines that stood like sentinels on either side. A thick steel gate appeared at the end of the incline, brushed metal reinforced with crossbeams, dusted in frost. Before Hank could reach for the horn, the gate opened inward on its own, silent as snow. A security camera disguised as a birdhouse winked from a post nearby. And there she stood, Sarah Keaton, head of Northwind Refuge, former Army Ranger, and the kind of woman whose presence built silence instead of breaking it. She was tall and wiry, maybe mid-40s, with sharply defined shoulders and a posture honed by years of command. Her complexion was fair but wind-burned, lined by sunlight and hardship. Her blonde hair was cropped short, practical and uneven, cut the way soldiers cut their hair when scissors are an afterthought. A scar ran vertically across her left eyebrow, pale against her skin, vanishing into her hairline. It gave her an expression of perpetual vigilance. Her eyes, clear, gray, disciplined, studied the truck as Hank parked beside the lodge. She approached with the grounded confidence of someone who had spent years navigating danger and trauma. When she reached the passenger door, she knocked twice, firm but not harsh. Hank opened it. "You, Keaton?" Sarah nodded once. "You must be Mercer. Aria told me you were coming." Her voice was clipped, low, pragmatic. "Let's get them inside." Hank helped Mara down carefully. She staggered but stayed on her feet, leaning into Atlas for balance. Sarah stepped forward, steady hands rising to support her, not touching until Mara gave a small nod of permission. Rook hopped down with a soft whine, tail low but wagging faintly, when Sarah crouched to greet him. Sarah examined the dogs quickly, her experienced gaze taking in every wound. "They've been through hell, but they're fighters. We'll treat their paws and run full scans." Mara exhaled, her breath trembling, but this time with relief. "Thank you." Sarah's eyes softened, barely. "You're safe here, Lieutenant. Both you and your partners." Inside the lodge, warmth enveloped them instantly. It smelled of cedar, clean linens, and faint antiseptic. Two staff members, both former medics, came forward to assist, each briefly introduced by Sarah. One was Lena Brooks, a petite woman in her 30s with dark curls pulled into a messy bun, warm brown skin dusted with freckles, and a calmness that radiated from her like a blanket. The other was Miles Kerr, tall and lanky with sandy hair tied back, clean-shaven and soft-spoken, his demeanor shaped by years of helping soldiers through invisible injuries. They lifted Atlas onto a stretcher, Rook onto another, and guided them down the hall. Mara watched the dogs disappear, her resolve wavering. Hank placed a hand on her shoulder. It was meant to steady her, but the moment his hand made contact, she relaxed. Just a fraction. Sarah motioned toward a small bench. "You need rest. You're still hypothermic and bruised. We'll take over from here." Mara sat, exhaustion overtaking her. But Hank, He's been driving all night. Hank lifted a hand. I'm fine. It was a lie, but a polite one. Sarah stepped between them. There's a bunkhouse if you want to rest before heading out, Mercer, or stay longer if you'd like. Hank shook his head gently. People to haul, miles to go. Mara looked up at him, green eyes bright with something unsaid. She rose to her feet despite her trembling legs. Then she stood at attention, spine straightening, boots together, and she executed a crisp military salute. Thank you, Mr. Mercer, for saving my life, for saving theirs. Hank froze, throat tightening as memory and present collided. He nodded slowly, hand over his chest. You take care of yourself, Lieutenant. Atlas and Rook appeared again, both carried out on soft canvas stretchers, heading toward the medical wing. But both dogs, despite bandages and exhaustion, lifted their heads as Hank passed. Atlas nudged Hank's leg with his nose. Rook placed his chin on Hank's boot. Mara whispered, voice cracked but full. They're telling you what I can't say enough. Hank crouched, scratched behind their ears. You boys stay out of trouble now. He stood, turned toward the door, and stepped back into the Montana morning, snowflakes drifting tenderly through the quiet air. A few months later, he received a postcard slipped under his truck's sun visor. A picture of endless white mountains. A short message in neat handwriting. We're okay. The snow here is kinder. Thank you for not leaving us behind in the storm. M.A.&R. Hank folded it, slid it back behind the visor, and started the engine. As the truck rumbled awake, he smiled faintly. Maybe miracles didn't always arrive with thunder. Sometimes they rode in the cab of a long-haul truck through a winter night. Sometimes miracles don't appear in flashes of light or thunder from the heavens. Sometimes they arrive quietly, in the steady hands of a trucker who refuses to look away, in the loyalty of two wounded German shepherds who would rather break than abandon their handler, in the courage of a battered lieutenant who keeps breathing, keeps fighting, even when the night seems too heavy. And sometimes God sends help in the form of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, people who choose kindness when it costs them something, people who stop when everyone else keeps driving, people who protect the broken even when no one is watching. Because in our daily lives we often forget the world is full of storms, loss, fear, loneliness, betrayal. But God never leaves us alone in them. He places strangers on our path. He opens roads we didn't know existed, and He gives us the strength to stand again, even when we think we cannot. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that miracles still walk among us, please share this video with someone who might need hope today. And before you go, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And has God ever sent an unexpected angel into your life? If you believe that God watches over the brokenhearted, that He protects those who cannot protect themselves, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your steps, and send His angels to walk beside you. In every storm, on every lonely road, and in every new day He gives you. And remember, hit like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, compassion, and the quiet miracles that still change lives. Amen.